Hello, everyone, and welcome to another Best Practice interview ahead of the Europe Awards for IR Magazine in 2020. I'm delighted to be joined by Thomas Larsen, the Head of Investor Relations for AstraZeneca. Thomas, good to see you, at least virtually.
Thank you so much for having me today. It's fun.
No, great to have you. And of course, this is replacing some of the work we'd be doing in person at the moment. And no news to anyone that we're in the middle of the coronavirus pandemic, and things have gone slightly differently than many of us would have anticipated. And I guess that's a challenge for IR. That's an understatement, I'm sure, but also for a healthcare company or a company in the business of providing healthcare solutions. That must really double the difficulty factor for you. In as brief a detail as you can, how would you characterize the past 12 months? It must be complicated.
Well, I don't think it's been so bad actually, but let me just give you a few ideas or examples why that may be. So first and foremost, AstraZeneca is already a global company, so we were used to using, let's say, virtual means of communications for a very long time. So actually, going virtual as many companies did in February and March was not a big change for us. I think the bigger change for me and for the IR team here at AstraZeneca has more been the fact that we're not out seeing people. So you go from traveling maybe a third of your time to not traveling at all. So that's a big change. It's actually been a good change because you have more time at home with your family. So we don't mind so much, but we still kind of miss that personal interaction with investors and going and seeing them in their offices. The full year roadshow we did in February was done physically. So I was in the US and Canada as an example. And that has been my last big trip this year. I did manage to go to Oslo, Norway on a roadshow in August where I felt it was the right time to do that. But otherwise, there's been no traveling for business this year. So that's a big change. The other change is that as a kind of a people manager responsible for people in AstraZeneca, it is a challenge to have people working from home because you don't feel that you can always give them the support and the help they need. And actually, honestly, I've been really worried about, let's say, the impact to people's, minds and like well-being from being on their own. We have team members in the IR team in AstraZeneca that are on their own, and that has actually been a big concern for me. So that's more like the people management aspect. That's a big change. And we have tried to make social things in the team and check in with each other as much as we can. Pick up the phone, call people instead of sending emails. So that element of being head of IR and looking after people is actually the thing that I've been thinking most about. And then in terms of investors, I think that they have adopted to a virtual world, and I think we have been able to keep the contacts. We have tried to turn it into an upside, and for instance, spending a lot more time trying to fix some of our infrastructure, in particular our CM system, where we keep track of all our interactions with analysts and investors. So trying to get the most out of COVID-19. So I would say, as a company in AstraZeneca, we're already kind of adopting virtual because we are spread all around the world. The big change for the team has been that we're not traveling. I think as a manager, as a team manager here, it's more kind of that responsibility for the employees. That has been something that I've been very concerned about, and how to maintain that in a virtual world. And then I think, lastly on the investor side, I feel we are as close to them as we ever were, but we were already having good relationships. I think you build relationships through personal interaction, and you can maintain them through virtual means.
Yeah, that's an interesting point to raise, and what most people have said. We're not speaking to many fledgling companies who are having to go out and market very heavily at the moment. I imagine that would be more difficult. But and you say that it's the online aspect of your IR at the moment is about keeping up relationships, keeping in touch. Have you had to? I mean, I assume you've had to do all sorts of new virtual, whether it's virtual meetings, online meetings, that sort of thing. Have you integrated other online events, other online formats recently to help keep up that contact?
Yeah, well, we do a number of events every year for investors. We call them Meet the Management. We call them science events where we educate people about science. That's one very important part of AstraZeneca because we are a science-based company, and in pharmaceuticals and biotech, science is kind of everything. The R&D is everything. Without that, there are no new medicines. We also do meet the management events where people get a chance to meet both senior and let's say next level management in AstraZeneca. And all these events we've had to turn virtual this year. We've been able to do more of them because for people attending on our side, it's not now a multi-day commitment. It's a 1 hour commitment or a 3 hour commitment, but you don't have to travel somewhere, make a long-term commitment to the IR team to do this. You can do it from home and you can do it 1 hour, 3 hours, right? So we've been able to do more of it. But of course, you don't have that like chit chat as you would have if you were physically together and you could have a drink afterwards and you can, chat with someone. So yeah, we have turned everything we can virtual. We're using Zoom for all our external events, except the quarterly results that we kept as conference calls, because there are compliance issues with Zoom at some banks, and that means that we shouldn't force people to use something which is not compliant in their bank. So conference calls every quarter are conference calls. There's a webcast still. For meetings in between, we try to use Zoom and also Zoom, webinar, which is a little bit more organized form of Zoom. And then internal meetings all done by, teams. So these are the tools that we have been adopting, and we had them already. We've just been faster at deploying them, and as you can see, branding and so on has also become more important. But they were already in place, and we just use them more. But let's say the DNA of each event is the same. It's just the way we do them and the way we conduct them.
Yeah, it's the same as we found at IR Magazine. You can try and keep the spirit the same, but of course there are going to be things that don't quite work, one to one. But it's good to hear you're, maintaining it. And one thing I must ask you about, just because AstraZeneca's name has been in the, the press headlines recently, obviously a lot of work around the a potential coronavirus vaccine, along with the, the Oxford University researchers. I guess my main question is, that must be something that you have to handle, IR has to handle very sensitively. It's potentially a huge bit of news and potentially something that investors are going to be incredibly excited about, let alone, wider stakeholders and the rest of the world. So I just wondered if you could talk us through some of the stumbling blocks around, communicating about something so sensitive.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Now we actually do a lot more than just the vaccine. We also have some treatments that will help on what we call the acute respiratory distress syndrome, so ARDS, which is one of the late complications of COVID-19, right? So people don't die from the virus; they die from not being able to breathe, mostly, or from organ failure. So we have other medicines that we are testing to help treat patients with that advanced disease. So it's the viruses, the prevention, and we have medicines for the treatment of either COVID-19 directly or let's say directly linked, side effects of the viral infections. But the vaccine is the one that has caught most headlines. So it is a challenge because the vaccine in our company is the people's vaccine. It's one we have made available at really no cost, or let's say no profit. It costs a little bit to produce it. We're getting covered for that, but we don't make any money. So it's really a charity, and I really call it the people's vaccine. It's supposed to be for everyone, it's supposed to be affordable, and it's supposed to be the vaccine that most people get. And that is the agreement between AstraZeneca and Oxford. There is no profit through the pandemic. And that is a challenge because there's a lot of interest also from investors, but they're not interested because AstraZeneca is going to turn a profit, but they're interested because it has wider applications, let's say wider implications, I should say, for the stock market. Mm-hmm. Because if we get a vaccine in time, we can get back to closer to where we were in the past quicker. If we don't get a vaccine, we may have to be more mindful of the risk of infection for a lot longer, and that is putting a brake on the economy, right? So investor interest in this vaccine is, I think, more because of the wider implications of society more than is AstraZeneca specifically. But since we don't want to give people a bad service, we want to treat them as if they were asking questions about our current business, then we spend quite some time on answering questions. So you spend time on something that doesn't really drive the valuation and has nothing to do with your current business. And this has been a bit tricky because that is a time consumption that we didn't have beforehand. And we now have to allocate a lot of time, for that. And you sit there and you tell people, well, don't put a number in your spreadsheet because we're not going to turn a profit from this. But of course, we're still there to help you if you have any questions. So that's a little bit the challenge from an IR point of view, that you are allocating time to something that is not really part of the equity story, It may be in the future, but we don't know. But you have to do it now because people have a need for information. And by the way, another point which I forgot to mention, AstraZeneca is not a vaccine company to start with. We only had one vaccine already, which is a seasonal flu vaccine for kids called fluenz. Maybe I should mention it because I'm not supposed to talk about our medicines when we have consumers listening. But anyway, we have one vaccine that we make available every year, and my daughter is getting here in school in the UK. And that has been our only vaccine, let's say, exposure. So from an IR team point of view, vaccines made up very, very tiny part of our business. And then we have also had to, as a team, then learn about vaccines, because since we don't have them in our pipeline, in our business, we've had to learn all about the science about vaccines very quickly in order to be able to service investors with answers. So that has been, it's actually been good because we never had the chance to do that, and vaccines are actually quite exciting and quite scientifically, interesting. But that has been an added complexity that we had to learn very quickly about vaccines.
Certainly, but well equipped in the new world. Really, that's vital knowledge going ahead. I think outside of a corporate application. I wonder what other sorts of factors have been, whether from your perspective, educating investors about them, or questions from investors that have been kind of highlighted by the recent let's call them macroeconomic or world changes. I'm thinking particularly, the added emphasis on employee safety, perhaps, or stakeholder safety, or even some of the social issues happening over the Atlantic in the US. Investors taking more of an interest in ESG, particularly issues.
Yeah, that's interesting. Actually, we have seen a slowdown, if anything, in ESG interest. I don't know if that is specific to our industry, biopharma or pharmaceuticals, or if it's something across other companies. I haven't had a chance to check with other companies. But we've seen less interest in ESG this year than we saw in the past. Or maybe I should say it in a different way. We've seen that the increase of the past is not continuing. So there is still interest, of course, and we get a number of questions. We just, actually 2 weeks ago, we had the first webcast ever for ESG investors with our chairman and the experts in our company on ESG matters. But there's been no increase, and that was a surprise. So actually, if we get interest in ESG topics, it's probably related more to the vaccine and more about affordable access and so forth. There's been relatively little interest in other aspects of ESG this year compared to what we would have anticipated. So maybe because we are in pharmaceuticals, we are seen as being maybe a solution to the problem. And that's why we are not getting actually so many new requests for things, because people are kind of saying, well, you're kind of doing everything you can to try to solve this issue out and try to save lives and try to prevent people from getting infected. And if they get infected, trying to help them not die from COVID-19. So I think that may be why we're getting a little bit of a pass. We haven't seen that increase in interest in ESG topics as we saw over the past 2 or 3 years.
That's really interesting. A lot of people I've spoken to say that's been something of a renewed focus, but perhaps, like you say, it's maybe something they're less innately involved with to start with. Maybe looking further ahead then, considering some of these changes that have been made, and some of I'm thinking particularly of the the IR teams who are finding they have more time, more resources to dedicate to activities. They've got more time with their management, perhaps with a virtual event or a virtual call. Do you think there are changes to AstraZeneca's IR program and IR in general that are going to stick in the long term? Maybe I'm thinking particularly around travel and the potential lack of it going ahead.
Absolutely. I mean, one of the things we have focused on this year has really been to improve our infrastructure, let's say the basics of the office. And that is including our CRM system that we have invested a lot of time in, are continuously investing a lot of time in. Because we think that we need to be able to reach the buy side more directly from the company. Because you can say we don't need a sell side to set up a Zoom meeting. We can do that ourselves. I mean, the value of a roadshow with a sell side, I think, is the experience dealing with the clients. And it's also actually, which I enjoyed a lot, is speaking to the salespeople. But that interaction we don't have anymore. In a virtual world, we don't have that direct interaction with the sales folks. And that's where you get a lot of insights. So I think improving our ability to reach the buy side directly is really vital. And that's why we have invested and continue to invest a lot of time in improving our CM system. We also looked at other aspects of our public company. For instance, we just announced the other week that we are changing our US listing from New York Stock Exchange to NASDAQ. So we also had time this year to look at our securities listing and say, okay, are we optimally positioned for what we think is the right for AstraZeneca? And we chose then to make a change in the US on the US listing. We're also doing other things and other projects in the background that are looking at not just talking to investors and so forth and talking about the equity story, but actually the fundamentals of being a public company. We've also made changes inside AstraZeneca in terms of work processes and so on, and kind of use this time to, that we are not, while we are not traveling, use that time to something else which is more proactive and will give us a better infrastructure and more productivity going forward. In terms of forward looking, I truly believe that we need physical meetings to build relationships, but you can use virtual means to maintain them. And that's kind of, I think that's our starting point for what could be the future, is that we still need to go and see people, and we still need to go and do what we call the Adam and Eve work, where we are finding new investors, we're building new relationships. That has to be still, physical and face to face. But once you have built that, once you have also gotten the person in the CRM system and kind of build a record of interactions, then from that point forward, you can deal with it virtually. So I do believe that in the future, there'll be less traveling. I mean, our management team, they love that they don't have to move themselves as much as in the past. They travel a lot already. And the virtual opportunities we now have is making them more productive, and they really like that. So we have already decided as AstraZeneca that our full year roadshow in February 2021 is a virtual roadshow. Let's see now what happens for the rest of 2021. But as far as I can see into 21, it's a virtual world. And beyond 2021, it will be more virtual than in the past. Because we have proven that it works. We have proven we can keep contacts going and relationships going. But I think it's the cultivating the new contacts. That's what we need the physical presence and the face-to-face meetings for.
Yes, I think you're right. That certainly rings true with everything we've heard. Thomas, look, I've taken up lots of your time. I've got one final question for you, and I hate to embarrass you, put you on the spot, but AstraZeneca's IR program is obviously one that we hear a lot about here, and obviously has received a lot of recognition at our awards and other awards over time. I mean, I think you've highlighted a lot of the things that sets it apart, but I wonder, in your words, what are you most proud of about the IR program? What do you think is going to, keep you in good stead for the rest of this year and into 2021?
Yeah, it goes back to something I said earlier, which is about thinking about the IR team. Because one of the things that we are very proud of is that when there are these rankings, then we don't look so much at the individuals within the team, but we look at the team ranking. How do we rank as a team? Because there are some companies that are being held up by one or two individuals. I think in AstraZeneca, I mean, we get votes for our assistants, which I think is great because they interact directly with investors and they get rewarded for that in votes. So it's thinking about it's a team effort. It is everyone has to lift, and these days we need it even more than in the past because in a virtual world we have to look after each other. We have to look after our colleagues, and I think the team effort is what I'm the most proud of. I think another element would be innovation, right? We always try to think, if we were in the other guy's shoes, sell side or buy side, what is it that we're looking for from a company? What is it that extra service, that extra, thoughtful add-on that makes my life easy? And then maybe thirdly, also the ability to talk about not only good news, but bad news. I mean, being even proactive when you have bad news. That's something that we have done a lot. We have done Q&A facilities when we had bad news. We sent out an email with the announcement in the morning and said, well, this is not so great, but you can speak to some of the guys responsible later in the day, 15 minutes with each sell-side analyst. So being proactive also on this positive news, I think is also setting us a bit apart and not being afraid of being out there when you have also not a great story to tell. Fortunately, we have had a lot of great stories, but we always have disappointment. And in a pharmaceutical company where you have a pipeline where, progress one day and setback and another day, you need to be prepared to talk also about bad news. So I would say it is the team, right? I think that is very important. And you are a team. It's a team effort doing II. It's not an individual. I think the ability to be proactive and be a little bit differentiated in terms of your service offering. And then, as I said last, also being open about the less so positive news, because it all kind of goes into our motto here, which is one of under promise and over deliver.
That's a good central tenet to have, I think, Thomas, and clearly puts you in good stead. Listen, thank you so much for your time today. I'm really looking forward to seeing you face to face as soon as it's possible.
Yeah, let's cross our fingers.
Yeah, absolutely. All the best. See you soon.
Thank you.